podcast. This week we're joined by Richard and Paul as we delve into some very ADLG specific stuff. So it's not the usual chat and nonsense. This is an ADLG list podcast in which we look in depth at the list which finished first through fifth in the recent roll call competition. That was a competition that was themed for the Roman pond, Roman armies and their enemies, anybody who could have dipped their toe in the Mediterranean. So we got an interesting mix. A lot of Romans came out, and we're looking at three different later Roman lists and also a couple of Hunnic lists here, all the way from number 5 up to number 1 in the competition. And so sit back and enjoy the podcast.
This means war.
Okay, well, look, it's been a while since we've done a Madaxeman list podcast, and we've got a new thing to do lists on. We're actually looking at the recent roll call competition in the 15 mil period, which was themed for the Roman pond, armies in the Roman era that could have paddled in the Mediterranean within reason at some point in their history. So all the way from the early Romans to the Patricians, and pretty much all of their enemies who were not in the desert or the far north of the wastes of Germany or wherever it was. So kind of quite a coherent theme. And I'm joined by regular list geezer, Mr. Case, who also happened to place, we're looking at one of his lists here, and you from the wastes of the far north, Mr. Paul Dawson, the York standard bearer almost, and we're also looking at one of your lists, and you didn't win either, and which is kind of reassuring.
No, neither of us won. Yeah.
Neither of you won, and I placed in desperately mid-table mediocrity, so my list isn't even really to be looked at here. But how's tricks, Paul? How's the gaming world up north at the moment?
Well, we end up still playing Mr. Johnson online when he's in Kampala, currently in Kampala. Don't ask him about his stone wall.
Oh God, in Kampala, that's kind of weird. Yeah.
So so the thing we did in lockdown, we end up playing with him quite a bit. But there's 3 or 4 of us up here play.
Yeah. And is it Northern? Is there Northern League coming up soon? Is there a Northern League one?
There is, yeah. It's unfortunately I'm missing this one, but 7th of May I think it is in Eccles is the next round.
Right.
So that should be fun for everyone. But no, I can't make this one. I'm away.
Yeah, it feels like there's actually a reassuring break at the moment from what was quite a relentless pace of competitions earlier on in the year. It feels like there's a little bit of a gap.
Yeah, Chris has got his one in May up in Blackburn.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to go to. So that's quite fun. So I think there's been a few more over the last year or so where sort of Paul Johnson always used to do Bay Fog over in what was Bay Fog and then became Bay Art. But he disappeared. So Mark and I've taken it on and sort of reinvented it as King in the North and got that in York based. And the Scots do quite a lot of good competitions. They're good fun to go up and play. So we go up north to see them in. And Alan Cutler's got his competition short in mid-July, which is always good fun.
No, I'm planning to go to that one. I just need to work out how to pronounce it. So it's like either Siggy and Dub or Ski and Do or something like that.
Ski and Do, I think it's
Ski and Do. Okay. Yeah. Well, I've sent my money off and I booked my B&B by the coast. So ready to drive up to that one, which should be good. But enough of that. We've now got let's throw up on screen. We've got what we're going to do is we're going to start with the top. Well, we're going to do the top 5 lists in reverse order because that's the way that it works, and that means we can actually talk to one of your compadres you just mentioned, Marco Baroni, and he came in 5th in this competition with the classic late Imperial Roman. Now, my first question with late Imperial Roman is it it's just 390 AD Eastern Army. Can you get away with using square shield legionaries with Lorica Segmentata for that one, or are they all in round shield by now?
I think the Lorica Segmata really disappear during the 3rd century, so you can't really use them much after about 280.
Okay, all right. That's probably So then 390 is way off it then, because it depends. And this is 15 mil, isn't it? I suppose if it's 28 mil, you maybe let people get away with it a bit more, but this is the proper later stuff.
I think Marco's all round shield from seeing them play on the table.
Oh right, they're just anything? Are they really just sunburst and stripes? It's a very good era for little big man, I guess. This is if you've got big flat shields with round things. So Marco's list. Eastern 390 AD, Initiative 3, and you've got, looking at it here, kind of unusual-ish, my first thought, in that the commands are sort of equally. There's a 10, a 7, and a 6 to give you 23 in total. First command is, actually, this is a sort of pretty traditional list, isn't it? You've got 4 heavy sword impact support legionaries, not gone for elite, not gone for armor, but chunky. The 1 heavy cavalry, 2 impact support auxiliaries. Do they need support? Interesting question. 1 light infantry, just a bit of screen. In fact, 2 light infantry, 1 with bow, 1 with javelin, and a light cavalry javelin in that first command, and quite a chunky, brilliant general. The next one has got 3 impetuous Goth heavy infantry and a 2-handed cutting weapon elite, clubman legionary, a couple of light infantry, and then another normal legionary. So that's 2 solid heavy infantry ones, and then a third command, which is really 2 cataphracts, 3 light cavalry, and a heavy cavalry impact with a brilliant commander as well, which seems a lot of command and control for that. So I'm looking at this and thinking it looks like a very traditional build, really, with some, but they, clearly I finished mid-table using a barbarian army, so I'm not looking at Romans. Richard, you used a Romanish army as well, I think. What's your thoughts on looking at this one? I'm almost surprised there's not more funkiness in it, but then maybe Paul can tell us a bit later that Marco, that's the way he does stuff.
Yeah, well, we'll see mine in a moment, and there's a lot of similarities. I think the support is well worth paying for, particularly in this particular period. There were relatively limited numbers of cataphracts, but likely to be a lot of cavalry, and even the medium sword impact stands a good chance in the open with support. As you say, I mean, it's two solid foot commands to take up width and go and get in the face of the enemy, attack if appropriate, stand in front of them if not, while a very maneuverable under a brilliant general mounted command tries to hit the enemy weak spot, with elite cataphracts and lots of good support mounted troops. So it looks, and judging where Marco came, I would imagine this would do very well, except perhaps against Huns.
Right, giving something away then about later in this one. Yeah, I think it's unusual to see. Really, to me that's like a block. Well, literally, it's a block of 6 infantry and then a block of 5 infantry, and not a lot of shooting. And then a block of sort of 2 cataphracts and an impact cavalryman. Would you stick? I suppose you've got the option of sticking those cavalry down the middle, but you've still got 3 light horse in it. That makes it, that sort of pushes you to use that third command out on a wing, perhaps. I don't know, Paul. What's you possibly played this in practice game? How
I did, and I think part of the logic for the Goths and things was, was there potential at this competition to come across a number of pike armies?
Yeah,
and if so, then obviously that command's going to go down the middle and come forward and scare some pike, maybe, with the logic of the heavy swordsman, 2-handed weapon, elite general. You're not just relying on the impact to try and take down the pike. You've got that wind draws every opportunity as well. I'm not quite sure how many pike armies actually did appear at the competition, but I think that was the logic for it.
There were some in the sort of bottom end where I was fishing, so for
Right.
sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I came across a couple, but yeah, it's an intriguing one. And there's no armor on any of these legionaries, and there's only one of them. No, sorry, two of them have been made elite out of the six. Because armor, armor versus elite is always a question, isn't it?
It is. It is, and I think he's going for width on it, trying to get the thing wide enough to take on what it's fighting. Because, as you say, there's a lot of heavy foot there.
Yeah.
I think both this army and Richard, with his late Imperials, had to take on Huns at one point, and that's when I think both of them lost, didn't you? I think you both lost to Huns.
Yeah.
And I think this one's not got the bows on the flanks, and I think if you talk to Mark, he'd probably say that would have really helped him out against the Huns, and he pushed them back quite a bit. But we'll get to talk about Huns later.
Yeah.
And I always think Cataphract elite are always worth having. I like them for trying to break down enemy infantry and part of the line. And you can only have the two elites, I think, in the army anyway, can't you? So you have to make a decision whether you want the Cataphract or the cavalry impact to be elites. And I think,
yeah, I must admit, every sort of 6 months or so, I forget that, and then I try and build an army with one elite and 3 ordinary Cataphracts to go for volume, and then I use them and I go, that didn't work. They've got to be elite, really, haven't they? It's a very weird thing how elite makes such a difference to Cataphracts.
It does. I think it does. And I think if someone might stand with you against cavalry if they're ordinary, thinking they'll break off or something, but against the elite, it gets a bit dangerous to do it, doesn't it? If they get a chance to get at you.
And again, the other thing with this late Roman, I'm always tempted by the new shiny toy of the rear support artillery piece that shoots over the legions not only because it's just a toy, but to reach out and stop people just standing in front of it. And I think, Paul, you've said there's not any shooting really in this one. I don't know, Richard, what's your thoughts on that artillery? Because it's sort of good value, and it creates something extra, but I wonder what you drop to not have it. Would you swap it for a Hun in that third command? Does that still works, or does that gut that third command too much?
I think it depends on the nature of the competition. To me, where they're really valuable is if you're likely to meet massed Cataphracts. In this competition, probably other than the Armenians, you were probably only going to face 2, and a lot of the Armenians are ordinary. So my decision was not to take the integrated artillery this time. I faced a couple of people who did, and they were annoying. They were never decisive. They did perhaps tip you into attacking when you might have chosen to stand off.
Okay.
But I think if you're going to take them, they're quite expensive in that suddenly they're behind something that's probably 9, 10, 12 points anyway. So you've got a very expensive file. So your whole game plan tends to then be set around that artillery. And I don't like to be that dependent on something.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
It also stops on that first move jump, doesn't it? Because if the whole thing of heavy infantry can move 3 UDs if you're outside of 4, you can't drag the artillery with you the same speed, can you?
No.
So
they only go 2.
Yeah. So that has an impact as well on you, depending on what you're fighting.
Makes you more defensive.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So is there anything you change about this list? Is there any tweaks if you were going, I'm going to use this? What might you consider doing differently? Or does it sort of obviously work for what it's supposed to do? You can actually see how it's supposed to work.
Well, I think, as we've commented already, it feels very short on long range missile power.
Yeah.
So, I mean, be interesting to contrast it with mine. There's a lot of similarities, but I've taken more shooting. So that's the only. I mean, that's my choice, and we'll see that in a moment.
Yeah, Paul, is that
Yeah, I think Marcus said to me the other day a bit more shooting on either side, and I think it does miss a bit of that. So I don't think you need the artillery, but certainly some bow fire to sort of help you, I think is worth doing.
Yeah, I'm just sort of looking what you'd swap out, whether
What
you'd,
out to do that?
you know, would you
Yeah.
lose one of those legionaries for 10 points and what you get a bowman and almost a mediocre bowman for 12 or something? Or do the generals all need to be brilliant? Could you make that first general competent? Then you lose some of the initiative, don't you?
Initiative. No, I think you probably want the initiative with it.
You
You
want
could
to go
drop. You
first.
could, how many? I didn't look at how many light horses got in it. Could you take one
I
of the
think,
Huns out for one?
Yeah, he's got 4. That first command, I'm not
yeah.
sure you need a heavy cavalry and a light cavalry javelin.
Hmm.
I would probably swap out one of those for an archer.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
The heavy cavalry does let you though stick it in the line, doesn't it? Especially with a brilliant general, and let you, if you're fighting a mounted army, it allows you to charge with things all at once, and then the cavalry's got a bit. If it's close, if it's shooting cavalry, it's got a bit more of a risk, hasn't it? If it doesn't evade correctly.
I agree, but do you need the light cavalry javelin as well?
Yeah.
You can kind of cover the same thing with
Yeah.
a bowman, but the bowman's a lot more worrying for a Hun than a light cavalry javelin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're almost getting a mini little cavalry command, but it's only one ordinary heavy cavalry and one light cavalry javelin. So that's not quite enough, is it? You're only dealing with 2 light horse with that. So maybe that is the tweak. Have a look at fiddling around with that first command to squeeze some bowmen in it and something like that. Okay, well, look, it came 5th. I can't argue with that from my mid-table position. You guys can look down upon it, but let's have a look and move on and see what came forth.
This means war. This means war.
So then, Mr. Case, here we are with yours. It's slightly different font, I think, or maybe I've just got the image a little bit bigger, possibly a little bit weird. So you are also late Imperial Rome. You've gone 15 years later, but you've stayed in the East. You've stayed with that initiative of 3. You've also got 23 units, clearly the magic number of the moment, 23 units. And yours is a bit more of that balance towards the two brilliant and an ordinary included general. But you've got an insane general in command 3. So you've got 10, 5 and 8. And it looks to me at first glance, it's a lot more mixed. Your middle command is full fat, everything, all the kitchen sink, heavy swordsman, armor, impact, support, elite, legionaries, Legion Palatino, heavy swordsman, impact, support, light infantry bow. So 4 legions slammed down the middle and light infantry bowmen. On one of the brilliant generals, you've got the 2 elite cataphracts, bit of light horse to support them, 2 bowmen, 2 legions, 2 medium swordsmen, auxilia, and a light infantry javelin. So you've got about 7 different commands in that first one. I think you can do anything with that one. And then in the final one, you've got a couple of heavy cavalry impact, a Hunnic light cavalry. You've got 2 more auxilia, so you've got much more on the medium foot there, all with support. Another 2 bowmen, so you're sat with 4 bowmen in Dave from the podcast packets of 1 ordinary, 1 mediocre, which is nice to see, and light infantry javelin. So well, look, this is yours. Start us through. I can see it's got more anti-mounted malarkey than the other one, but clearly slightly less go through spearmen and pikemen and other people's legionaries malarkey than them. So how, and you've also got a brilliant unreliable general and an ordinary included unreliable general, which is bold, but is one of your things, I think. But talk us through it, Rich. What was your thought process in putting this one together?
Yeah, so I assumed that I would normally be defending, which is why I took the risk with 2 unreliable generals. And as you say, the concept basically is you hold the center with the 4 legions, and then depending on the terrain, you either put the 2 lots of strong mounted next to those 4 legions and expand through rough with the support troops, or you put both sets of good mounted on the extreme wings if it's a very open table. It's quite deceptive, because if you're facing mostly quality foot, you've got 6 heavy sword impact support and 4 medium sword impact support. So if you're facing hairy barbarians, you can pretty much be sure some of them are going to come on to you. You've got impact and support, so it's very hard for them to hurt you in the first round, and you should then grind them down.
Yeah, that's 10 wide, isn't it, actually?
Yeah. Plus then you've got the impact cavalry and the cataphracts,
Yeah.
so that's 14 wide.
Yeah.
Plus then the bowmen and the light horse extend it. So it's
big,
got
actually.
sort of it's got
big.
a 20 line of combat. If you've got difficult going, the LI can extend that further. And with 2 brilliant generals, although they're a little bit in penny packets, actually the medium foot and the LMI tend to work as 2 blocks of 4. So you've normally got 3 movement groups in each of the brilliant commands, which means you should be able to move everything at least once. And against everybody except Huns, it tended to work very well, because I would pin them somewhere and grind them down somewhere, and usually then get round a flank, either get a breakthrough from the cataphracts or get round the end, because a lot of people maybe had a line of 16 to 18, not 20. Against the Huns, the real problem was that 2/3 of the table was open. There wasn't any rough going to anchor on, and so and what I discovered was, although I alternated the bowmen with the medium sword support, and the medium sword themselves stood up well to the attacking Huns, but they weren't enough to put off the Huns attacking. And so the Huns killed the bowmen and then slowly gobbled me up. I think if I'd interspersed the bowmen with the legions, then the Huns would have been more scared about taking away the overlap on the bowmen, and I might have done a bit better. But I think generally, because it's got a lot, it's complicated to use, but it's very much a Swiss Army knife, which is what you expect from a Roman army. There's almost no enemy where you haven't got a game, because you can shoot at mounted, you can hold against hairy barbarians, you can tackle pike. So I was very comfortable with it. As I say, I think I would just need to refine my tactics for use against the Huns.
Paul, what do you look at this?
I like it. It's not dissimilar to the way I've played sort of late Romans, that the centre command, obviously going down first and just block it, filling up that nice bit of table, and as you say, the 2 brilliant generals with all the tools on either flanks to try and pick and mix the sequence of who goes in where against who and try and cause problems, and it works really well. You've got to play it well, but it works really well in terms of in that. And I like the cataphracts with the medium swordsman, because you can get on and kind of through the terrain and stuff, you can attack at a reasonable speed with them all together. So I think it looks like it works really well. And you've got the bowmen on the flanks that we discussed as well to see off some lights. Did your unreliables cause you a problem, Richard? Any game? Was any game you thought, blimey, I wish he wasn't unreliable at this point, or did it generally work out okay?
The first game was interesting when I rolled 3 1s for my first 3 command rolls, and both commands were unreliable. But because I deployed assuming that they would be unreliable, and therefore my opponent had the choice to either, it was very hard for him to gang up on one command without triggering one or both of the others. So, I mean, the difference is, you know, I could make them both reliable. I would lose a light horse, and I'd be down to 22. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, the short answer is there's games where it slowed me down, and if somebody had wanted to play for a draw, that might have been a problem. But otherwise, I don't really think it caused me a big issue. It's the thing is, you have to assume you're going to defend. It doesn't work for armies that are essentially all mounted or want to. You want to be sure you can attack immediately across the front. For that, it's too risky in my view. But if you're going to be a more slower kind of reactive army, then having the unreliables is less of a penalty.
Are you choosing to defend with this, or you know, in game mechanic terms, because you've got that initiative of 3? Or
Yeah,
are you
quite
choosing
often.
to, or are you choosing to attack so that you can put your commands down second? Because I can see you want terrain. Yeah,
I'm usually choosing to defend because I want more control of the terrain.
Yeah.
I want to be the person who adjusts second.
Yeah. And shoves that field so it's ready for your bowman and your medium swordsman and the rest of it. Yeah. Did you find that there was anybody out there who really was able to contest medium terrain against you? Because you've got 2 auxiliary and 2 bowmen in both of those commands. You've got 2 blocks of 4. The bowmen obviously shoot, but some of them are mediocre, but they, you know, it swings and roundabouts. But
yeah, the problem was when I met Robert's Middle Imperial Romans, when he had 4 armored medium swords with an impact.
Okay,
it was rather more than I could handle.
Yes, yeah, that's going to run you over, isn't it? Yeah.
But I just, you know,
that's quite an unusual mix
just
anyway.
Held back against them and won elsewhere. So
yeah. And did you find it was the legions forcing other people to fight them and grinding them down that played quite a big thing, or were they an anvil that people avoided? Because I do actually like the idea with a Roman army. You know, it seems there's a way of building Roman armies in that you start off going, oh, I'd like to try and use loads of legions, and then you pick all the toys, and then you just whittle away at the number of legions, and you end up with an army that's got quite often you end up with an army that's got minimum ones, and they don't do much fighting. But it looks like these guys are designed to fight, and in some ways the competition was designed, or the list of armies was designed to encourage that to happen. But did you find they got stuck in, or were they too scary and people didn't want to engage them?
Most other people, the only people they didn't fight were Huns. Everybody else had their own good combat troops, you know, whether it's pike or other legions or cataphracts or something. So I think in every other game they fought, and to encourage that, I took 4 of the 6 just as impact support. So no armor, no elite. So they're tough, but they're not scary. And I don't necessarily expect to win with those. I expect them to survive a long time while other stuff does the killing. Yeah,
no, that's an interesting one. But if you can get legions actually fighting, I think that's grand, isn't it? That's just what you want to be doing. And if they're chugging down the middle, doing that legion thing and trying to sucker people into combat, that really works. Okay. And you said, you know, you had struggles against Huns, and you mentioned that interspersing the bowman thing. You know, we're going to come on to the Huns in some numbers quite soon, I think. But is sticking, would you still have gone with the interspersed thing, or was it kind of, you go, actually I didn't quite get the terrain, or you know, what do you think about that, the outcomes of those games? Was there something that was out of your control?
I only lost the one game against Hubert, and I think that was partly down to the terrain.
Yeah.
And partly down, you know, we had a round of combat where it was 2-2 in 3 combats. But if he won, he had Furious Charge, and he won.
Okay.
And you know,
It's
he
just
might not have won.
Fine margins then. Fine margins.
So, but you know, he won fair and square. It wasn't really down to luck. He took a calculated risk because he was elite and I wasn't, and it paid off for him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would do anything. The only difference I would do is, as I say, in the first command, it would have slowed me down a bit, but I would have interspaced the bowmen in between the heavy swordsmen, just to make it a bit tougher for any Huns to tackle those. But other than that, and I would have hoped to get better terrain.
Better terrain, better dice. So Paul, you are Mr. Hun in this thing coming up next. What do you look at with your Hunnic hat on? Not that you're actually wearing one at the moment. It's just a funny camera angle.
It's a tricky, and I think both Hun armies, when we come to them, have got a slightly different. They're similar, but there's some difference in terms of how they were used. I'm assuming, Rich, you were forced to attack, were you, with your army? Was that what happened, or did you end up defending?
No, I defended in the mountains, and I was quite happy at that point. But then all of the terrain ended up down one of the short sides of the table, and then Hubert managed to roll sixes and remove at least one of the pieces, and I managed to roll sort of ones and not move any of the pieces. So it wasn't well distributed, and then I didn't get to move anything. So, you know, if the pieces had been scattered across the table, it would have been a completely different game, because he wouldn't have had as much opportunity to keep pulling back and sniping at me. But you know, that's the name of the game, isn't it? I mean, I should have had tactics to cope with that. I thought I did, but they didn't work.
Well, and the bowmen are the things that the Huns don't really like the look of. Everything else, you don't really want to go and start. You could spend some time shooting at the middle lot if you want to, but you know, with that armor, you need to be attacking the commands 1 and 3 with the Huns and trying to create problems and force gaps in lines and things to happen.
Exactly.
You know, with a couple of light, you know, you just want a couple of light horse in front of command 2, hoping that maybe something happens or some gap opens, or you can pick off the lightfoot bow or something. But it needs to be going after the two commands 1 and 3 definitely, and trying to pull them apart.
And that's what he did.
Does the 4 bowmen worry you, Paul? You know, is that like more than you'd really want to see, or are you kind of going, that's life, I've got to tough that out?
I think it's just life. I think you've got to recycle stuff through, haven't you, if you can. I think most of you don't really want bowmen shooting at medium guys, but they are elite, and you accept you're going to take some casualties. And it's the same. I fought a late Roman that had a mix of bowmans, and he gave me an opportunity to charge in, and I took it. And you know, it didn't work out. I had to pull back off them again, and then I went back in a second time, and I got them the second time round. So you know, there's always the thing of like we said, if you go fight them, they're not shooting at you if you can get it right. But
no, I must admit that's the magic thing, isn't it? I don't know if you've seen the reports of the Assyrian 28-man Assyrians I used down in Bournemouth on the video. There's one of them where it's fighting a huge shooting army, and it was just almost, you were sticking a single unit into a frontier 3 just to stop 3 of the buggers shooting.
Yeah, just to stop it, just to stop it shooting. It cuts it out for a while, then the rest can kind of creep up and get into combat. Okay, well look, let's move on and let's look at the next one.
This means war.
So, Mr. Dawson, we have your Huns, and we're getting into the medal places now. So this is the third
only
place
by a point from Richard, who's a bit
only
hard
by a
done
point,
to
but you know, but look, I think it's fine, and we're doing this on Zoom, but you're above him in the windows as well on mine, so it's obviously all working out quite well.
Right,
it's a bit like that university challenge thing when poking upwards or something from the young ones. But so your initiative 3, which is perhaps surprisingly low for Huns, you've got an old school 21 units. I say that because it just feels like it's sort of creeping up in terms of numbers. Ordinary brilliant and competent are the generals. Teeny tiny 4 with the ordinary included, no shock there. And then a 9 and an 8. And what have we actually got here? It's the interesting thing is everything's got a bow. Literally everything on those 21 has got a bow. You've only got 2 infantry bowmen in the middle command with a brilliant general. And it's 1 heavy cavalry, 1 medium cavalry, 2 light cavalry bow, 1 heavy, 3 mediums, 2 lights. No, 4 mediums and 2 lights, and then 5 mediums, 2 lights, and a big old sprinkling of elites there. So you kind of fancied shooting with this, didn't you? You didn't go for the other Hunnic options of the crazy foot or the Goths or the whatever. What's the thinking behind that? Because that's Hunnic's an army that I do keep meaning to use, but partly because I think, well, you hurl the Goths at them, and that almost acts like that Roman command to occupy them and gives you the time to get around the flanks. But you're just going, we're all going to shoot.
Yeah, and it's partly I had an army in the draw that needed to come out that hadn't been out, a little bit of refurb and give it a go, and it looked like a reasonable thing to take it to. Then you get into how do you want to use it? As you say, there are people that have got a load of impetuous troops and stuff, but I took the view that it would be fun to try and play with an army that was just shooting. A couple of guys at Northern League have used one and been quite effective with it, so I thought I'd give it a go. Huge discussion about Command 1. Should Command 1 be all light horse and run off around a flank or something?
Because it's the tiny command, isn't it? It's 4 strong, but you've actually got an elite heavy cavalry and an elite medium cavalry, as well as your 2 lights, one of which is elite. So I've used those small commands and actually almost gone the other way and gone, I'll just stick the general in with an ordinary medium cavalry, so I'm not tempted to try and get them involved in anything. But if you've got 2 elites, you're actually doing something with them, aren't you?
Well, it was partly to help push back anyone else's light horse command in front of you on a wing. Obviously, force you can ambush with it if you needed to ambush with it, but generally I prefer just to stick it on the board somewhere and put the other 2 down afterwards. The theory, I suppose, was when an opportunity arises, and it does happen, you get the heavy cavalry down the flank, you can use a light horse which I did on one game. I used a light horse in front of a couple of impetuous cavalry and stood, and then and then the other guys are swinging into the flank, and being a heavy cavalry with as a general better for doing that. And you can get that in and cause a bit of chaos with it, and it just gives a bit more protection as well, because you don't really want, on a 21 army, you really don't want to be losing your general if you can help it. Fine going fighting towards the end.
So were you almost using him as a heavy cavalry impact for using that +1 as the general? You were quite
if I needed to. I think in one game him and the medium and the 2 light horse ended up fighting round the back of a Roman army against some light horse and 1 heavy cavalry impact we'd had a couple of rounds of shooting at it before we got into it, so it was already hurt. And we took that on when the army was getting close. It caused problems as the medium. I went go and stand in front of a medium swordsman and shoot it to pieces, I think, on one game. And got into the flank of a heavy cavalry impetuous on another game. So it kind of worked. You could have gone for medium and had another heavy in the other command, but I quite liked it. In that.
And with all these shooters, I guess this is almost a more general question across the whole army. But particularly for heavy cavalry bow elite with a general or medium cavalry bow elite, the question is always stick or twist. Are you happy to always take a charge, or are you like, look, I'm going to pretty much evade the first couple of times that it happens, and I'm not going to stand until someone's taken hits or been chipped away in some way, shape, or form from shooting?
I don't really want to be charging into impact troops, but certainly I was quite comfortable in charging into into bowmen, into flanks, and especially as you start running out of table, which eventually the Huns can do, you're going to have to stand and then break off. You're just going to end up having to do that, and then that creates gaps.
But is your plan though to go forwards, to do shoot, evade until you start running out of table, or because the other way of using Huns is to use the maneuver to whiz over and just pile into, move up, shoot, and then pile in one area. Is it the sort of the second, or
I think it's mixed. I think it was flexible too in terms of how I used it. The two bowmen, I put them in the list, and some people say don't do that, have more cavalry. My logic was with them was to use them to try and support if I need to drive off light horse. Not necessarily something to go into terrain, but it let me potentially zock people from a piece of terrain because I haven't got anything else to zock them with, which is sort of useful. And also, but I used them in 2 games quite successfully, sort of side by side, where you kind of end up with the corner where people are trying to hide from you, and you could use them at longer range, sniping into the mix with the elite shooters as well. So you were getting the extra pluses because once you start getting into this situation where people are kind of rally up and you're shooting lots more at them and you're +1 or +2, there's only so long that tends to work before the unit starts to fall apart, and then at some point you just decide if you want to go in. I have done it's not always a good tactic, but people with bits of rough, they get worried about cavalry and rough, but just go across it if you need to. I've stood in it and fought in it if I needed to. Putting a medium cavalry into someone's flank in the rough is not the end of the world, because you can turn around in a different direction, so and then cause another problem. So you can't just go and just shoot with it because that doesn't really work. You've got to sort of try and create gaps and angles and get things through. Try and get I think at one point against Peter, I got a light horse behind him, thinking it would cause some chaos, and threw it into a light foot and probably got beat in the combat and died, rather than actually take out his light foot with furious charge, and then I'm behind him and causing all sorts of chaos. So you've got to try and pick at the edges and try and find a way through. You can't just line up and just shoot with it. It doesn't work. But they are all elite. They will stand up to a fight if they need to. If someone charges you, and you can break them off. Or I've done things before where you just let one unit stand and let everyone else run away, except maybe you lose him, but that allows you then to bring them all back at a different angle or something, and put pressure on a different way.
Yeah, because you've got two big slabs of 5 cavalry and 2 light cavalry in those last 2 commands, and so two blocks of 5. I'm kind of looking at 2 blocks of 5 cavalry, and I'm kind of thinking, that's quite unwieldy, and in my mind, once it gets past 3, I sort of start to worry about them stumbling across themselves. But is that just me not using enough cavalry very often, or are you slightly looking at it thinking the same way? Is it 2 commands almost, of 3s and 2s?
Yeah, well, I think in an ideal world, you want the command and control to mean you can do that. Because, as you say, if you've got a line of 5, let's say you choose to evade with all 5, that's a big width going backwards, and any wheels obviously don't go so far the wider you are. But if you let yourself be broken down into four movement groups and you've only got a competent general, then that can be more of a problem.
Get wrong as well.
So that's where some practice games and playing with it, and it's that kind of issue that your opponent will try and exploit. I mean, that's the fun of the game, isn't it? It's move and counter move. I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se, but it is something.
It needs some tricks, some skills.
Depending on the terrain and depending on the opposition, something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. So how was that something you worked through in practicing then, Paul, or is it just, or are we just inventing a problem that you never came across?
No, I mean, the first 2 games I got, I was, we'll get into Huber's Army later. He's got the strategist in it, which obviously gives you a couple of advantages. I'd partly gone for the early period because I've only got steps as terrain, so someone's got to make a choice if they want to attack me or not, because it will be steps at that point. And of course, they particularly choose to defend. And I think, but Pete, he got down the terrain and he got his impassable down, and so did Mike. And they, although we chipped away at each other and had some 2 good games, nothing really was going to come of it too much. I was shooting some of his stuff down. He was driving me back a bit, but the board was littered with terrain. As I say, rough bits aren't a problem, but I couldn't shift the impassable. So again, if I had the strategist with it, that roll to re-roll on a bit of impassable could have cleared the areas out and opened the board up more in terms of what was going on. But they both had strategists with their armies as well, so they were. It wasn't even close on the initiative. They both outdiced me on initiative. Even if I had a strategist, I'd have still lost, and they would have defended. So those games kind of, it was tricky to do things. It wasn't any value in flank marching, so we kind of cancelled each other out. But then once you start getting to some of the other armies, I chose to attack a couple of times, and again, I think Cuba generally would defend with his. But it was trying to find the space and pick it up in the right way. My last game was against Harrison with his Huns, but his Huns are completely different construction in terms of he does have the impetuous cavalry. So I was dropping terrain down to force him to make a decision about where his impetuous cavalry were going to go, and then try not to go near them. And in that game, it was interesting that he had a load of medium cavalry ordinary bow versus the elite, and the elite just shot him to pieces because you're getting the +1 in defense and the +1 on attack. And it was really interesting to see that, because we're very similar in terms of construction on terms of number of units sort of fighting each other on that side, and the elite just made such a difference in that game.
Yeah, it really it's a really good value, isn't it? So, but going back to that sort of question about two blocks of, or two commands with 5 cavalry in, were you using them as a block of 5, or were you using them as a a 3 and a 2 on table?
Starting off in a 5 usually. Sometimes the heavy ones were kind of the command 2 was out on a flank, so that would actually ended up I think on a couple of games almost being deployed slightly in a column, so then it expanded and come round and let the bowmen be on the inside of them. And then on another one, it was sort of more, it was in the middle, supporting the bigger cavalry command with the smaller one, just sort of defending or trying to widen the table and make people more interested about what was going on over the far side. So no, once you get into it, I would leave 1 or 2 behind, or bring some in at an angle, and you were constantly trying to find the gaps so that when someone wanted to charge some, you were potentially exposing flanks if you weren't covering it clever.
Textbook Hun stuff, really.
Typical Hun stuff. And you can't just line them up as a group of 5, but you can drop a light cavalry bow behind a light cavalry elite if you need to get you an extra equivalent of an extra shooter. So that makes you effectively 6 cavalry elite shooting across the table as well, with another light cavalry maybe supporting one of the other ones. So, but you've got to create angles, and you've got to create gaps in people's lines to do it. And as I say, occasionally gaps would appear, and I get a light cavalry straight through, and then once you've got a light cavalry through and coming up behind people and pinning them, and you're shooting him from the front, and you're not zocking him, he's got a problem.
He's got a real problem. Yeah, all right. And is there, having played your 5 games with it, is there anything you kind of came away thinking, oh, I could have done that? You've talked about initiative. The strategist is a trade-off for the step only terrain. Could you have bumped up the initiative to another point?
I think, well, you can only have, I mean, you've got a command of 3 for the army. So strategist is the only thing you could do. So that would have given you the +1. As I say, there was a big discussion about having the small command just light horse, but the problem then where we got to with that when sort of thinking was, well, yes, you can send it on a flank march, which is very successful for the Hun list that come 1, but it's kind of a bit one-dimensional. And actually, when you're trying to use all your pips to create problems and do things with, I felt for my list, having a general in a heavy cavalry bow with a medium gave me the opportunity to attack and do things with it, and use the number of points that you've got in the game to make a difference. Whereas if that had just been ordinary with a competent and brilliant, and it was only light horse, I didn't feel that you'd have enough. You'd be able to take enough opportunities with it. I just thought it was a bit too lightweight, but as I say, I didn't win it. Somebody else did, deploying that tactic.
Richard, any thoughts on that? Anything you think, would I tweak it, or are you going, yeah, that's interesting, I'd like to try this on table?
I think it's very interesting. I think the idea, I could see how the bowmen give you options. I can also see how, against someone with lots of good medium foot, they're obviously
in a way, a tempting piece of bait, perhaps. But I think the key is just having lots of elites, because it makes, even if you take the odd hit, you know, you can pull them out of the line, rally them back up, and send them back in. And particularly with the light horse, it gives them so much chance of hanging around that bit longer. So I think it's a very good army.
No, I must admit, I'm tempted to wander over and look in the drawer and wheel out some Huns. It's because it's an army that I've kind of always thought there's got to be something in there, but I've never really got to grips with how to do it. But just actually hearing about, yes, elite for the medium cavalry, that actually does allow you, but also it does allow you to attack as well, which is something that's kind of dear to my heart. It's not just a muck around and just trying to win by the mathematics of shooting, because I think, you know, going back to I always have this kind of horror from the tail end of playing Fog, at which it was just actually about the mathematics of massed light infantry shooting causing, you know, 10 different reaction tests on the enemy, and you're always going to fail 2 of them because that's just maths. And it was just like, oh, but this, you've actually still got to attack to do something with it. So intriguing. Well, look, let's move on to number 2.
This means war. This means war.
So here we are then with Mr. Leonardos, all the way from Greece, our Greek visitor, who stole away with one of the trophies and packed it back in his hand luggage and whizzed off back to Greece. But not using a Greek army, slightly disappointing, but I'm sure the patricians were there. It must have been one of their territories or something like that. And the classic late hairy kind of Roman thing, 470 AD, number 88, Patrician Romans. And the way Georgia put this together, you've got the first corps is a drop it down on table small one, but still, you know, got some punch. You've got 3 heavy cavalry bow, horse archers, those almost Byzantine cavalry, and 1 Allen light cavalry bow as well. So that's a pretty sort of old school heavy cavalry shooting command, but without the elites, included general with that. You've got a brilliant general. He has got the 2 ordinary cataphracts, a light horse bow elite Hun, 3 medium swordsman impact support, also Auxilia Palatina, and 2 Isaurians light infantry javelin. So that's basically cataphracts and 3 auxilia. And then the final command with another brilliant general, 3 more of those heavy cavalry bow. So this is going almost proper Byzantine. Couple of heavy cavalry impact, an Allen light horse bow to pad that out to make it up to a 6 block of mounted. 1 more impact support auxilia, 2 bowmen, and 2 light infantry, which gives an initiative of 3 and the now almost compulsory total of 23 breakpoint. So again, this looks, my initial thought is this something that's sort of been optimized to play Huns and avoid heavy infantry? But I don't know, Paul, what do you think? What's your first thoughts looking at this one? It's slightly not where I
think
would
it's
have
quite
thought.
clever that he's managed to avoid having no impetuous troops in it whatsoever.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't spotted, that little change you could do in the list, which makes it
Yeah.
quite interesting. So he hasn't got the pressure on the pips that a patrician quite often has in terms of trying to hold back stuff and wait for his moment. You sort of look at it and think, well, where's he going to fight with and stuff? But all those heavy cavalry bow are clearly going to be out on the flank somewhere, and I guess he's going to put the other one in the middle with the medium swordsman and the 2 cataphracts and put them down last and try and get his matchups. So I think it's a really interesting list. It's not what I would have expected to see from a patrician one. What do you know what he fought with it over the 5 games?
I could probably dig it out, because I think he's I'm not submarine, but he was kind of steadily creeping up the table towards the end. I think he's on the table next to me at the end of it.
He fought Armenians on his last game, didn't he? That's what it was possibly.
Yeah.
If I
I'll see if I
nick,
can dig,
yeah.
I'll see if I can dig that out in the background. But yeah, I guess it's even which one would you put down first? Would you just drop? Are you forced to put one of these in the middle? It's there's not an obvious center there, is there? In some ways,
No, it's not. You'd imagine you put the first one down first, but you might not. Depends if you want to try and keep people guessing which side you're going with your other command, with the other brilliant one, I guess.
Yeah, it could be, couldn't it?
So I imagine it surprised quite a few people when it turned up on the table. Not what they thought, and I don't really know how he played it. I don't know if anyone saw him play it, but
let me have a look. I wonder if there's anyone out there. So here we go. So in the first game, he no, let's have a look. So he played Ian Mackay in the first game, who was using late Imperial Roman. He played Steve Nice, who beat me in the last game, was using Seleucid, got a draw against that. He played Dave Saunders and got a draw, and Dave Saunders was using late Imperial Roman, and he played Fraser, who was using Galatian, and he played Nick Sharp, who was using Armenian in the final game. So Galatian, Armenian, and Seleucid, and 2 Romans. So I guess that's almost looking at outmaneuvering other Romans and putting those Clebinarii into it. Intriguing.
It's quite, with none of your fighting troops being elite, it does potentially take away some of your punch, doesn't it? I mean, I think the only elite unit you've got is the light cavalry bow.
Yeah. I'd be tempted maybe to use the elite points on the cataphracts, but can you get there? Is that a possible list?
You can't have that in Patrician.
Oh, okay. Right. No. Okay.
And I think I think, as Paul said, I think many people, you're not going to expect a Patrician to look like this. So the opponent's deployment will have come on expecting either impetuous foot or impetuous horse.
Yeah.
And so he's got that advantage that they've got to mentally rethink while he's charging up and putting pressure on them.
Yeah.
But its vulnerability is not having much elite stuff, and a lot of it is in quite small clumps. So if your opponent can gang up on one element of it, I mean, the heavy horse archers can ride away, but the medium swordsman not so much.
You're almost sacrificing those on, because I think that command 3 is actually, the more I look at it, the more interesting it is, because 3 heavy cavalry bow, 2 impact heavy cavalry, and the 1 Allen light horse is a big, quite scary block to anybody's mounted wing in this period.
Yes,
it's quick, it's got punch, it's got shooting, it's 6 wide, which is the magic number, and then almost your I can see your 1 auxiliar is there to sort of semi-protect the archers, or possibly be the poor sap who sits just in the terrain to give the cavalry an overlap in terrain that they can't go into. It's actually almost a Sassanid. If the Sassanids had impact cavalry, that would be sort of a semi-Sassanid command in some ways, wouldn't it? It isn't what you think at all about patricians, but I can see that chewing up a lot of other people's mounted stuff. And then maybe that bit in the middle with the 3 auxilia. Again, Richard, I think you made the point that medium swordsman impact support can still stand in the open against an awful lot of stuff. They're frontline combat troops. The fact they've got the medium word in it isn't quite as tricky, and the cataphracts make them even more chewy as a block of 5. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, part of the strength is there is a lot of it. So, if he keeps it all quite tight, even getting what I said earlier, it's probably quite, if you can gang up on it, fine, and if you can get better quality at it, fine, but you're still going to have to do some hard fighting to actually break through.
And the other bits can sort of squirt out the way. So Paul, would you have, well, I guess if you were dropping your Huns against this one on table, you wouldn't, as Richard said, you wouldn't expect this, and it might come was an interesting surprise.
No,
Yeah.
but again, I think you'd be trying to. I mean, as you say, you've got the heavy cavalry impact, but it's not elite, is it? So you're slightly
No.
less scared of it. Same as the
Yeah.
cataphracts aren't elite. So I certainly would be looking to go after the two flanks again with it, really. But particularly if you can get around, if you could try and keep command 3 from playing too much, which would be difficult with all the cavalry coming at you, then you clearly would want to go after the command 1 and then try and flank command 2 if you could. Easier said than done, but I imagine there'd be a lot of shooting across the table. So but you're relying on your elite versus his armor, aren't you, on the cavalry?
Yeah, I'm thinking I played 2 of the opponents. So the Galatian army is obviously a lot of heavy foot, and I think perhaps one of the things with this is it's got the ability to avoid fighting someone else's heavy foot.
Yeah,
very much so. And the Auxilia can stand against warband. The cataphracts will cause them a lot of problems because they cause me a lot of problems. And then it will chew up the handful of normal medium cavalry that those Gallic armies have. And I think the Seleucid army as well had quite a squishy cavalry wing. And even if you have an army with a decent impact cavalry wing, all those horse archers and the sheer number of them does give you a chance of knocking them down before they actually get into you. So it's just a very unusual Patrician army, really, with quite a lot of maneuverability. So
against something like the impetuous foot, of course, you can just put the 3 auxiliary and 2 cataphracts stood in front, waiting for them to charge, can't you?
Of course,
while all your cavalry is trying to put pressure on his flank, and you end up in this situation where he's either forced to charge against the odds or wait to be taken apart on the flank. That's the issue with it.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the this is one of the interesting things with a system that is played in so many different countries and different places. You get different metas. I don't know if this is a result of a Greek meta or whatever, but it's a very different approach. I've not seen anything like this with a Patrician army myself, but it's making me kind of go, oh, let's go flick through that list again. But we're also on rails with patricians from the days of DBM, aren't we? It's kind of like there's a one way that you use patricians, and you have the impetuous foot and a few legionaries and did it bish bosh. But this is actually it's there's a different way of putting it together completely.
I think it's a challenge.
It's interesting. It is an Eastern version to get the Isaurians, and there's a lot of similarities between this and, say, some of the Dailami type armies, which are a mixture of heavy cavalry shooters and impact medium swordsmen. So, if you're somebody who likes to play those armies, you might gravitate towards this kind of army design.
That's a really interesting. Yes, I bet you could almost make a Dailami or whatever army that was nearly identical to this. You'd not. Is there one of the armies that even has the cataphracts? But yeah, five Dailami, loads of Sipahi type shooters, couple of impact Bedouin cavalry. You could almost make an army like, and I really like playing with those armies. So that's a really interesting catch, actually. That's really funky. Wow, it is an Eastern army to go into the Eastern Desert and fight those people over in the East, and it seemed to do quite well. So, all right then. Well, look, let's get into the final top of the table one. Let's move on.
This means war.
Okay, then. So here we are into the final list of this podcast, and this is the gold medal top of the table. Les Huns, all the way from Hubertania, and Hubert. I think he's moving back to France soon, isn't he? So he will only be dropping in occasionally, I think, from now on. So not quite signing off with a trophy, but nearly signing off, and definitely with a trophy. And this Hunnic army, initiative 4, highest initiative we've seen so far, 21 units, the proper number for Huns, although I suppose maybe it should be 20 in some ways. every single thing is elite in this army. And he's got the strategist as well. It's the slightly later period with plain and steppe as terrain. And command size wise, there's a 12, obviously, with the strategist, a 5 and a 3, teeny tiny one. The 3 is it's taken a decision Paul didn't take. It's all light horse, 3 light horse bow elite with an included general. The second one is almost there. That is a Paul-esque command: 1 heavy cavalry bow, 2 medium cavalry bow, and 2 light horse, all elite, ordinary included general again. And the strategist there with 2 nobles, heavy cavalry bow, 6 medium cavalry bow elite, and 4 light cavalry bow elite, which to me is 2 commands in one, but with the strategist on it. So I'm not quite sure where to start. So Paul, you used the Hun, and Richard, you definitely played this one. Do you want to go first, Paul, about how this is, if this is different to yours, or?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, that he took this. He had the strategist, which I think the plus is on the terrain, and the the extra one to initiative takes you to the 4 rather than the 3 that I had. The light horse one, the way I saw
as well.
Sorry?
Fortified camp as well.
Yes.
Snuck in there, yeah.
But what I saw him do in the 2 games, which was interesting how he done it against Richard, he won the initiative both times and then chose to defend in the steppe.
Okay.
Suddenly he was stripping the terrain out, and I think what I saw him do on one of the terrain, I assume he did the same for the other one, was he put a very small 2 pieces of brush down and a very small brush with a hill on it, because you can only have 1 hill with brush on it in the steppe. So he pretty much wiped out, apart from the marsh and the gully, he pretty much wiped out the terrain. And on both occasions, I'd seen he'd sent the small command off on a flank march. I guess on the principle that he's defending, he doesn't need that one. It's going to go and try and sack the camp, and the guy doesn't know which way it's coming. So although the other person's attacking, it probably puts them on the defensive in terms of their thought process of how to deal with it.
But I do think cavalry it comes on super early, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah, with that extra +1. Yeah. I don't think it didn't turn up any time. I saw it sack 2 camps. So I think his strategy worked. He also had quite an interesting way of deploying his. I saw Command 2 deployed a couple of times where he had the heavy cavalry in the middle and a medium cavalry either side, so as a block of 3. And then the 2 light, which I think was set up at 5 hoods, and then I think he set the 2 light cavalry bow up separately, 1 either side of that block and 2 hoods forward. So the gap in the middle was 3. I didn't then see him move it, so I don't know where his idea was. If he liked what he saw, he just moved up and picked up the 2 light horse and travelled, or whether his plan was to use the 2 pips to take the 3 cavalry left or right to join up one of the light horse.
Okay.
But I did think, it looked like you're asking the strategist. You talked about my size of my commands, but you've got 8 cavalry there.
That's a huge block, isn't it?
And try and pick holes and do things with a strategist. It felt like you're asking that strategist to do a lot, and whereas the small command, its job is to clearly go sack a camp and bother people from behind if it can get through. But it worked, didn't it? So you can't criticize it in terms of a setup. But I'd probably feel like 8 was an awful lot of cavalry to have in that one command.
Yeah, even with the +3 for the strategist command pips, it does feel that there's a difference, but that's the only way that you get the extra initiative, isn't it? I think, is it, or is there extra higher command and control if it's Attila himself, or is it still +3?
No, it's still +3.
Still +3. This is the way you have to have it. Okay.
I think the way he played it was typically he split, as Tim was saying earlier, that Command 1 was like 2 versions of Command 2. So he would have a block of a heavy cavalry with 3 mediums, and another block of heavy cavalry and 3 mediums, and then 2 blocks of 2 light horse. So he might have, which would be deployed up front. So you might have 2 light horse, 4 cavalry, 2 light horse, 4 cavalry, and then the 3 cavalry from Command 2 and 2 light horse, and then the all light horse command could either flank march or be on an extreme wing to try and do an end around. And
sorry, is that a new technical term you've invented?
what
is that an on-table flank march is now called an end around?
Well, yeah,
I like it.
It's
good.
Probably American football influence.
It probably is, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look, he's going for an on-table end around. I'm liking it. I'm channeling my inner Ted Lasso now. That's excellent. Okay.
But it means if you've got command 1 in 4 blocks, unless you throw a 1, everything is still moving with the strategist.
Yeah.
So it's a slight risk, and there were times when I was playing him where he would throw say a 2, and I'd managed to break him up into more than 4 movement groups, and there might have been opportunities there. But generally, because everything's elite, it's very hard with shooting to get that second hit. You can get that lucky first hit, but the time you get the second one, he's pulled it out the way or he's rallied it. So that made it extremely tough.
And how did he use it? Again, same question I asked Paul in a way, because you played it. Did he use it as a fall back, and charge when I have to, or was it aggressive with the cavalry to hold you back?
Yeah, against me, I was defending, so he came fairly forward. He had 1 in the center and the small light horse commander on an extreme wing that sort of came forward and pinned some of my lighter troops. He then threw some of the strategists at one of the blocks of heavier cavalry against my mixed bow and supported medium swordsman. Whereas command 2 just kind of did fall back shooting until we got to the edge of the table where we fought. So yeah, its big thing is it's tough and resilient, and with the fortified camp, even if you do manage to slip past with your light horse, there's nothing really to do with it other than try and pin him from behind.
Yeah, you're not getting much.
Did he take your camp, Richard, with his army? Did he get round to yours? Did you manage to defend it?
Or did your army just crumble in the face of him anyway?
No, I think right at the end he took it. He broke where he broke through my sort of camp was in the middle. He broke through the center right, where I had the medium swordsman and bowman, and eventually managed to get a light horse into my camp. But it was at the last knockings. I mean, it was interesting. If he hadn't been able to take my camp, then I was about to start doing more damage to him because he was beginning to run out of table. And with hindsight, I should probably have put my camp more skewed to one side, but then you're worried about the flank march.
Exactly. Yeah.
So did it feel the strength of Hubert's design concept is that he forces you to do suboptimal things because of the risk that he might do something else.
Yeah. Did you feel like you were being, you were commanding a Roman army being attacked like Huns? Did the Huns feel like Huns?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it was very hard. It was very hard to handle because it's very hard. As I say, the terrain played a big influence because he could just flow back. I couldn't pin him against anything except the rear table edge, and I had enough heavy foot that I was, mainly moving forward too. So it's just very hard to land a blow on him. If you can land a blow, you can hurt them, but he's not going to let you, except in the places where you haven't got much chance.
Yeah. So what's I suppose it won all 5 games. It seems a bit nonsensical to say how could you improve it, and it is absolutely crystal clear that it does what it says on the tin. We're going to have everything shoot. It's all going to be elite. The commands are, as you've spotted, there's effectively 5 commands which are identical, sort of in here, or 4 or 5 near identical commands, and one's got a really clear job to do, and if it goes on a flank march, that's grand. And especially if you're falling back, you're going to get a lot of game turns to make sure it comes on. It's very laser focused and crystal clear. Is there anything that you think? Again, Paul, you've mentioned about possibly moving away from the strategist to give you a little bit more grunt in that second command and control in that second one. Anything other than that? Anybody can see that?
It's hard to knock something that's all elite with a fortified camp that's going to shoot you to pieces or try to.
Exactly.
The small commands, I say, I think it's a decision about how you want to use the army.
Yeah.
But having that small command, it can go on the flank, as you say, and fuck it up, or it's a bit lightweight, but they say that +1 for coming onto tables makes quite a big difference, and there's
really
quite a few more armies doing that. Having that tactic,
I've seen that happen recently. Yes, definitely.
And
don't snigger, Richard.
And the thing is, there are relatively few armies that can have light horse generals.
Good, good catch.
And obviously, you don't have to include the general, but
you kind of do, don't you? Really,
on a small one, you generally want to. So that makes it more viable. The only thing if it was me, the only thing I might have done is moved one of the medium cavalry from Command 1 to Command 2, make the general competent, and risk having it unreliable, because you've got a strategist on Command 1. You can throw the 2 light horse forward and keep the heavier cavalry further back than 5. It's only 1 in 6, and that would just, having 6 in that command with a competent general would just, I think, give you a little more
bit more grunt,
bit more ability to play games with the opposition. But other than that,
it's a tough one if you're going to be flank marching almost every time. Then if you've got a risk of one of your you're not able to suddenly rush. You've got a risk of not being able to go forwards and buy space to fall back, which is pretty huge, isn't it? It's an argument, but you've got to have the sort of cojones that makes it very difficult to spend your entire life on a horse, I imagine, to do that. That's the problem.
Exactly. And it's more that it comes back to a personal style. I don't think it's necessarily better. It just depends how you personally like to play.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. Good. Well, look, two very interesting Hunnic armies, 3 very interesting Roman armies. I think seeing 2 Huns do well that are all about shooting is great. Not the obvious one of all the charging cavalry. Some unusual ways of putting together Romans, and they're all pretty different as well. I think maybe clearly the Huns are similar because they're Huns, but there's still different ways of doing it. So I think that's a really interesting mix of armies from what's actually turned out kind of a bit of a plucked out of a hat idea, turned out to be a surprisingly good and diverse competition. I think certainly I enjoyed the games that I did once I get around to writing up the reports of the mixed ability results of the Gallic army, which didn't quite work out as planned. But no, very interesting one. Paul, what was your sort of summary of your 5 games? So we'd wrap up in the last sort of few minutes. You enjoyed it as well?
It was really good. Yeah, just thought it was really good fun. I enjoyed them. I think after 2 draws, I was thinking, have I got my army set up right? But then, got 3 wins after that, and it was great. But I think what we all like about this competition, about this rule set and the competitions, is you go and you never quite know how people's armies are going to look and how they're going to do it. And there's so much ability to create something different, or from what each person's army of the same army number can be completely different. It's just part of the fun of the game, isn't it? I think it's why we all enjoy it so much.
Yeah, that's it. It's actually, you learn something every time you look at a different list, or you come up with different ideas. There isn't a way to do that list. That list has a way that you always do it. There's very few lists that are like that. There's clearly a few, but there's people can always pull something interesting out of the bag.
And I think that is particularly true because a lot of the competitions are not, just classical or just Roman. They're a particular year. They're a subset of armies, and that immediately shifts the balance of what combination might be stronger. And that means every time you get the fun of rethinking about the list, rather than just saying, well, this is my Norman list, or this is my late Roman list. And also the armies are small enough that if you need one or two extra bases, like two-handed weapon legionaries or whatever, you haven't got to suddenly pay 24 of them.
Yeah, to feel the whole thing, to feel them all out. Good. No, well, look, I think that's it. And then I guess to say we've got a few more competitions coming up, but not quite for a while. It's probably going to be end of May or almost into June before we're off and running. But I think we shall. I've got a few other requests of themes for us to do in some of these podcasts to move to the other format of we all make up a list and then critique each other. So I'm sure we will be back as a threesome. There will also be other more traditional 7 people chatting nonsense Madaxeman podcast coming up as well, and possibly even some in the field stuff in the future as well. So all 3 different strands are catered for. So I think on that note, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Paul. Been very entertaining to go through these lists and get your insight from people who actually nearly took home or did take home trophies from this one. And we shall see you all later. So goodbye.
Bye. Thanks, Tim. Bye.
Bye, Tim. Thank you.